Gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of PLA with myself, Chuma, and my experts, panelists, Nick and Bruno. We've got two questions that we'll be dealing with today, and we're going to have a go at the first one with yourself, Nick. And the first one says that I have a tenant. So this is from an estate agent. I have a tenant who moved out at the end of last month. There are a few repairs which the tenant may be liable for. But the tenant insists on doing the repairs themselves. So this includes buying the paint for the walls, etc. However, how do we advise that the tenant, that they cannot do the job themselves or appoint their own contractor in this instance? The landlord will appoint a contractor to complete the work. They've already obtained 3 quotes and have contractors who are able to assist. So Nick, what is the sort of the ground there once the tenant has moved out, or like whose obligation is it, or who may actually do the repairs, who's not allowed to do the repairs, and is there sort of a middle ground there?
Sure. So I think the most critical part of this particular question is the fact that the tenant has already moved out of the premises. All right. Obviously, when a tenant rents a particular premises, what the general obligation is that the premises must be handed back to the landlord in the same condition that it was received, fair wear and tear accepted. Okay, so for the fair wear and tear thing is always a problem with our clients. It just means that you can't keep them liable for normal usage of the things within the property. But generally, the property has to be handed back in the same condition as in which it was received. So were there taps there? Yes, you need to hand it back with taps. Were the walls painted? Yes, you need to hand it back with the walls painted. Okay, it's as simple as that. So that is the obligation on the tenant. They have to give it back to the landlord in that particular condition. And so the presupposition is that the tenant will do whatever is necessary in order to get the property back into the condition in which it was received during the time that the tenant is in occupation of the premises. Okay, once that possession of the property is handed back to the landlord. Okay. They obviously, in terms of the Rental Housing Act, there's certain requirements that the parties have in inspecting the property to make sure that everything is in order, okay? And then possession is handed back to the landlord. And obviously, in terms of a lease agreement, in terms of the Rental Housing Act, there may have been a deposit which has been given to the landlord, which is intended to cover damages or things that need to be rectified on the premises after possession has been handed back to the landlord, okay? And the landlord is under an obligation or has a right, in fact, to utilize that deposit in order to rectify stuff on the premises that may not be as it was when the property was handed over. Obviously, a landlord cannot decide that they want to use the deposit to improve the premises in any particular way. The intention of the deposit is only to rectify and return the property to a condition in which they handed it over to the tenant in the circumstances. Okay, so the real crux here is the tenant has left the property and possession has been handed over to the landlord. And in my view, that means that the landlord is now in the position to rectify the property. The tenants had their ability to bring the premises in line, and now they've left the property in whatever condition, and now the landlord is in a position to bring the property into the condition that it needs to be in, and they have the election of who to elect as a contractor and what needs to be done in the circumstances in order to bring the property in line. It can't be that the act already says that the landlord obviously must take any steps in order to bring the property in line, and then must refund whatever the balance of the deposit held by him is within a certain period. Okay, and it would make absolutely no sense, just from a practical side, that a tenant can now decide that the landlord must hold off on the use and enjoyment of his premises after the lease agreement has terminated, in order for the ex-tenant to now take whatever actions in the premises after the lease agreement is done. So it's fairly straightforward. I really think the critical point is the handing back of possession. Once possession is handed back, and the act sets out certain strict parameters where that's supposed to be done, the lease agreement is now terminated. The tenant has no right anymore to come into the property or to do anything on the particular property. That lease agreement is done. It's the landlord's responsibility now and the landlord's right to take whatever actions they need in order to get the property back into the condition in which it was received, and use the whatever deposit is held by them in order to do so. So I think it's very simple. From the agent's perspective in this question, how do they tell the tenant that the tenant can't enforce, their own contractors or decide that they're going to do the work themselves? It's as simple as the tenant doesn't have a right. It's an ex-tenant now. The ex-tenant has no right to access the property or to do any work on the property at the point where the lease agreement has now come to an end, in my view.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. That does cover pretty much a very good part of the question.